Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was not just a charming western about two outlaws riding into the sunset. It was a production that narrowly survived a relentless war between the old guard of Hollywood and the rebellious spirit of the 1960s. Behind the camera, the set was a pressure cooker of studio panic, near-death experiences for the leading men, and a script that everyone in power tried to burn before it ever reached the screen. While audiences saw the effortless chemistry of Paul Newman and Robert Redford, the reality was a set defined by isolation, physical illness, and a director who almost fired his lead actress. The production was a minefield of ego and technical disasters that should have sunk the movie. Today, I am revealing 20 weird facts about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid that even hardcore fans do not know. And stick around for our bonus fact: the mysterious reason why the real outlaws' families claim the movie's ending is a total lie. Number 20. The production almost ended in a literal bloodbath. The production nearly ended in a bloodbath before the first reel was finished. During the iconic train robbery sequence, the special effects team used real dynamite to blow up the baggage car. They drastically miscalculated the charge. Instead of a controlled cinematic pop, the entire car disintegrated into a cloud of shrapnel and splinters. Huge chunks of heavy wood and metal rained down on the crew. Paul Newman was standing just a few yards away and had to dive for cover as the blast singed the air. The studio was horrified, not by the danger to their star, but by the fact that the explosion was so powerful it destroyed the camera gear positioned nearby. It was a near miss with death that set a grim, high-stakes tone for the entire shoot. The destruction was real, and the fear on the faces of the crew in subsequent takes was not entirely acting. Number 19. Catherine Ross was effectively banned from the set. Catherine Ross, who played Etta Place, was effectively banned from the set during sequences where she was not performing because of a massive fallout with director George Roy Hill. Ross was an avid photographer and brought her own camera to the set. One day, cinematographer Conrad Hall allowed her to operate one of the professional studio cameras during a setup. Hill, an ex-Marine and a legendary perfectionist, saw this as a gross violation of professional etiquette and union rules. He did not just scold her, he banned her from the set unless she was actively in a scene. For a large portion of the production, Ross sat alone in her trailer, isolated from the rest of the cast and crew. The tension between the lead actress and the director was thick enough to ground the production to a halt. It created a fractured atmosphere where the outlaw family was completely broken behind the scenes. Number 18. The Steve McQueen billing war nearly killed the movie. The casting of Robert Redford was a massive point of contention that almost derailed the film. 20th Century Fox did not want Redford. They wanted Steve McQueen. McQueen was interested until he realized he would not get top billing over Paul Newman. The two stars entered a cold war of egos that lasted weeks. McQueen demanded split billing where his name would be higher on some posters and Newman's on others. When Newman's team refused to budge, McQueen walked away. The studio then begged Marlon Brando and Warren Beatty to step in, desperate to find anyone but the nobody, Redford. It was only because Newman's wife, Joanne Woodward, campaigned for Redford that the studio finally gave in. Even then, the executives remained skeptical throughout the shoot, convinced they were heading for a disaster because they could not land a second superstar. Number 17. Montezuma's Revenge turns the set into a medical disaster. During the filming in Mexico, almost the entire cast and crew, including director George Roy Hill, were struck by a devastating bout of Montezuma's Revenge. The production slowed to a crawl as crew members were unable to leave their trailers due to severe illness from contaminated water and food. Paul Newman and Robert Redford were among the very few who remained healthy throughout the ordeal. Their secret was a strict diet of tequila, beer, and canned soda. They spent the Mexican leg of the shoot in a state of perpetual mild intoxication to avoid the bacteria that had crippled everyone else. The feverish, frantic energy of the final scenes in Bolivia, actually filmed in Mexico, was fueled by a crew that was operating on pure exhaustion and two leads who were the only ones physically capable of standing. It was not a scenic shoot, it was a survival exercise. Number 16. The cliff jump stunt almost ended in a drowning. The famous cliff jump into the river was a logistical nightmare that almost resulted in a fatal accident. While Newman and Redford Africa did a short jump onto a hidden mattress cushion ledge, the full jump required stuntmen. At the Colorado location, the stuntmen leapt into a river that was much more dangerous than the scouts reported. One of the stuntmen hit a submerged rock and the other was swept downstream by a current that was terrifyingly strong. The production had to pause as the crew scrambled to rescue the men before they were pulled into rapids. The fun moment in the movie was actually the result of a near tragedy that left the stunt team shaken and the legal department in a state of total panic. Number 15, George Roy Hill and William Goldman wage a script war. Director George Roy Hill and screenwriter William Goldman were in a state of constant, simmering warfare throughout production. Hill hated the witty, light-hearted tone of Goldman's script. He wanted a gritty, dark Western that reflected the cynicism of the late 60s. Hill frequently screamed at Goldman on set, calling the dialogue too clever and unrealistic for outlaws. At one point, Hill tried to cut the iconic bicycle scene entirely, calling it a useless piece of fluff. It was not a collaboration, it was a battle for the soul of the movie. Goldman was so frustrated by Hill's changes that he eventually stopped showing up to the set. The movie's unique tone was actually the result of two men trying to make two completely different films. Number 14. The bicycle stunt rivalry caused major ego friction. Paul Newman prided himself on his athleticism and insisted on doing the bicycle stunts himself. However, a professional circus performer was brought in for the most difficult maneuvers. Newman was so frustrated by his inability to master the tricks that he spent his private time practicing obsessively, often crashing and bruising himself in the process. He refused to let the stunt double take the credit, leading to tension on set when Hill expressed dissatisfaction with the double's work. Newman eventually performed most of the riding himself out of pure pride. It was not just a charming scene, it was a display of a movie star refusing to be outdone by a professional athlete. Number 13. The studio fights to kill Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. When the song Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head was first presented, the studio executives were appalled. They believed a pop song with lyrics had no place in a Western and would make the film look like a joke. The studio fought to have the song removed until the final hours of editing. Even the singer, B.J. Thomas, was recovering from a throat infection during the recording, giving the song a raspy quality that the studio used as an excuse to try and trash the track. They did not see a classic, they saw a tonal disaster that would alienate audiences. Director Hill had to put his entire reputation on the line to keep the song in the movie. The track eventually won an Oscar, but at the time, it was viewed as the mistake that would sink the film's credibility. Number 12. The Super Posse Chase Causes Genuine Physical Misery. The famous chase across the plains was a source of real-life suffering for the actors. To capture the feeling of a relentless, inhuman force, Hill insisted on filming in grueling, remote locations under a blistering sun. The actors playing the posse were professional rodeo riders who pushed a pace that left Newman and Redford physically broken. There are no trailers or shade, and water was scarce. The dust was so thick that the crew had to wear masks while the actors were forced to breathe in the grit for every take. The exhaustion you see on Paul Newman's face during the middle of the film was not acting. It was the result of a director who wanted his stars to feel as hunted as the characters they were playing. Number 11. The studio panics over the unconventional title. 20th Century Fox absolutely hated the title, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. They thought it was too long and clunky for a Western. The working title was originally The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy, but it was flipped because Paul Newman was the bigger star. The studio tried to change it to The Moving Men, or The Outlaws, to make it sound more like a traditional shoot-'em-up. They believed the original title was too cute and would warn audiences that the movie was a comedy, which they think is a death sentence for a Western. Even after they agreed to the title, they tried to market it as a serious drama. When the first trailers resulted in laughter, the studio panicked and tried to re-edit the film to remove the humor. Number 10. The film rewrites the rules of cinematic violence. This was the moment where the old Hollywood Hays Code finally died. The film's mix of light-hearted humor and sudden, bloody violence shocked censors. The scene where the outlaws are cornered in Bolivia pushed the boundaries of what was allowed on screen. Your like and subscribe helps us uncover how these boundary-pushing films forced the industry to create the rating system we use today. Without the controversy of this film's ending, the transition to modern, gritty cinema would have taken years longer. Number 9. The production accidentally destroys a piece of history. The town of Grafton, Utah served as the backdrop for several iconic scenes. However, the film's massive success had a grim real-world consequence. After the movie became a global phenomenon, the abandoned ghost town was swamped by tourists. These fans did not just visit, they stripped the buildings of wood, bricks, and artifacts for souvenirs. The production used the town as a preserved piece of history, but the fame the movie brought ended up accelerating the total decay of the site. It was not a preservation of the West, it was the beginning of the end for one of its most authentic locations. The cinematic immortality of Butch and Sundance came at the direct cost of the physical history they were portraying. Number 8. Robert Redford's career was nearly killed by studio bias. Robert Redford was not just a second choice. He was a despised choice by the studio. Executives believed he had no leading man potential and referred to him as a pretty boy who lacked the grit for a Western. Throughout the early weeks of filming, there were rumors that the studio was looking for any excuse to fire him and bring in a bankable star. This created an environment where Redford felt he had to prove himself with every single line. He was reportedly very stiff and guarded, which caused friction with the more relaxed Paul Newman. The legendary friendship did not start with a spark. It started with Redford fighting for his professional life against a studio that wanted him gone. Number 7. The Bolivian location was a complete cinematic illusion. The Bolivian scenes were a total technical lie. The production could not afford to move the crew to South America, so they filmed in Utah and Mexico instead. To make the North American desert look like the high Andes, they used specific color filters and carefully chosen camera angles to hide non-native vegetation. The local extras in Mexico did not look like Bolivian peasants to the director's eye, so the makeup department spends hours every morning adjusting their appearance with heavy cosmetics. It was a logistical nightmare that resulted in a Bolivia that exists nowhere in reality. What audiences took for authentic location shooting was actually a triumph of makeup and filter tricks. Number 6. The record script price created an industry target. The script for the film sold for $400,000, an unheard of sum in 1968. This created a massive target on William Goldman's back. Every other writer and executive in Hollywood wanted to see the project fail to prove that such a high price tag was a mistake. When the film entered production, rumors were leaked to the press that the script was unfilmable and the dialogue was trash. The pressure on set was immense, leading Hill to snap at his crew as he tried to justify the astronomical cost. Goldman later remarked that a money cloud hung over the entire production, making every small delay feel like a career-ending catastrophe. Number 5. The famous freeze frame was an act of creative defiance. The ending of the film, the famous freeze frame, was not the original plan. Hill originally filmed a graphic and violent shootout where the audience sees Butch and Sundance being torn apart by bullets. During editing, Hill realized that seeing his heroes die in a pool of blood ruined the legend status of the characters. He chose the freeze frame to immortalize them. The studio hated this too. They wanted closure. Hill had to fight for weeks to keep the frame still, eventually threatening to take his name off the film. The freeze frame was a revolutionary act of defiance against the tradition of showing criminals pay for their crimes with visible death. Number 4, the real Butch Cassidy's sister drops a bombshell on set. During filming, the real Butch Cassidy's sister Lula Parker Bettinson visited the set. She was in her 80s and told Newman and Redford that her brother did not actually die in Bolivia. She claimed he returned to the United States and lived out his life in secret under an assumed name. This shook the actors who were trying to play the definitive versions of these men. It created a strange, ghostly atmosphere on set where the actors felt like they were playing myths rather than men. Newman became obsessed with the idea that the real Butch might still be alive. The production felt less like a movie and more like a seance for a man who refused to stay dead. Number 3, the movie was rewritten as a love story between men. In the first drafts of the script, Butch and Sundance were written as antagonistic rivals who argued constantly. It was Paul Newman who suggested they play it as a love story between two men, a deep platonic bond that superseded everything else. They rewrote scenes on the fly to emphasize the US against the world mentality. It was not a Western about crime, it was a movie about the end of a friendship. This shift in focus is what made the film a classic, but it required discarding months of work on the original script. The chemistry was not just luck, it was a deliberate narrative choice. Number 2, the movie deliberately whitewashed the outlaws' violence. The most controversial aspect of the film was the deliberate whitewashing of the real outlaws' lives. The real Butch and Sundance were responsible for multiple deaths and were known to be much more brutal than the charming rogues portrayed by Newman and Redford. During production, a local historian tried to protest the film, claiming it glorified cold-blooded killers. While the studio ignored him, Newman took the criticism to heart and struggled with making Butch so likable. He insisted on adding the scene where Butch admits he has never actually killed anyone before, just to give the character a moral out that the real Butch Cassidy never had. Number 1. The real-life Wild Bunch were not the friends they seemed. The ultimate fact about the production was the gap between the on-screen friendship and the historical reality. While the movie portrays them as an inseparable duo, the real Wild Bunch was a loose, often fractured collection of criminals who frequently betrayed one another. During the final years, Sundance was reportedly becoming increasingly paranoid and violent, a far cry from the cool, collected character played by Redford. The production team was aware of this but chose to ignore the darker historical truths to maintain the film's buddy energy. The reality of the production mirrored the film's theme. The myth is always more compelling than the truth. Bonus fact, the most closely guarded secret of the real outlaws is the 1991 DNA revelation. For decades, the Bolivian government and historians claimed they had the bodies of Butch and Sundance in a small grave in San Vicente. However, in 1991, a team of forensic scientists exhumed the remains. DNA testing proved the bodies belonged to a German miner, not the American outlaws. This has fueled the persistent legend that Butch and Sundance escaped the shootout entirely, just as the movie's freeze frame suggests. The movie's ending is not just a stylistic choice, it might be the most historically accurate part of the film, leaving the outlaws' final moments as a permanent mystery that science still cannot solve. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid remains a masterpiece because it was a beautiful accident. It was the last gasp of the old studio system meeting the raw, rebellious energy of new Hollywood. It proved that you could break every rule of the Western genre, the music, the humor, the ending, and still create something that lives forever. Its legacy is one of defiance and the power of cinematic myth-making over cold, hard facts. The next time you watch that final charge, remember that the chaos behind the lens was just as wild as the outlaws on screen. If you enjoyed these revelations about the wild ride behind this classic, hit that subscribe button for more untold Hollywood stories. And share in the comments, do you think Butch and Sundance really died in that shootout, or did they make it out alive?